My city, Shy City, Shy Town, gotta do it justice. So we talked about cities, and we talked about some of my favorite cities in the world. I didn't mention where I'm located. I'm located in Chicago, in the state of Illinois, the third largest city in the United States. Now, you all know that I do work for the University of Illinois, and yes, we're about 2.5 hours away from the city of Chicago. However, a lot of our work, whether they're the investors, the actual companies, or even just meeting interesting people, it all happens in the wonderful city of Chicago. It is the seat of Cook County, which is the second most populous county in the United States, and it's located on the shore of the wonderful and frigid, in the winter, Lake Michigan. I want to share a little bit about Chicago because I feel like it is often overshadowed by its larger cousins on the coasts of the United States, and globally, it's overshadowed quite a bit by these wonderful cultural hubs. But Chicago just has a lot going for it, and it's very welcoming, so I hope this can generate some interest in Chicago. The name itself might be from a Native American word, Chickaqua, which means a wild relative of the onion, maybe even garlic. And according to early visitors who traveled in this area, they said there's a lot of garlic that grows in the forests of this region. Prehistory, the area that became Chicago was inhabited by members of the Miami and Potawatomi tribes. The first known permanent settler in Chicago was a trader named Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable. So interesting. He was of African descent, and perhaps born in Haiti, he established the settlement in the 1780s. Today, he's commonly known as the founder of Chicago. After the Indian Removal Act by the U.S. government in 1830, there's the Treaty of Chicago in 1833, in which several tribes, including the Potawatomi, had to cede nearly 5 million acres of land in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and move west of the Mississippi River. This forcible removal of Native Americans from their lands was quite awful, and I'd like to go into it at a separate time. On August 12th, 1833, the town of Chicago was organized with a population of about 200. Within 7 years, it grew to more than 6,000 people. The city rapidly grew in size. It was the site of the Chicago Portage, which was essentially the connection between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River, and it became an important transportation hub between the eastern and western United States. Railways connected it across the United States, and canals connected steamboats and sailing ships to the rest of the country. It's unique in that it's not a coastal city, but in some ways feels very coastal. The city rose to further prominence on the national stage when a certain Abraham Lincoln was nominated in Chicago for U.S. president in 1860 at the Republican National Convention. The city responded fairly well towards rapid population growth by creating good solutions for better sanitation, diverting sewage contamination away from the freshwater of Lake Michigan. In 1871, the Great Chicago Fire destroyed an area about 4 miles long and 1 mile wide, which was a fairly large section of the city at the time. However, from the ruins of the previous wooden structures and an example of the city's resilience and ingenuity and hard work, modern constructions of steel and stone rose, setting a precedent for worldwide construction. During this rebuilding period, Chicago constructed the world's first skyscraper in 1885. And the name 1871 survives today in one of the top entrepreneurship co-working hubs in the city. It's called 1871, and it's so unique that this city has that history of resilience and growth. By 1900, almost 77% of the city was foreign-born, including Germans, Irish, Poles, Swedes, and Czechs. And whites made up 98% of the city's population. This is unique considering the founding of the city, if we go back to the earlier mentioned man, Jean-Baptiste, who was African, and his wife, Kitihawa, who was a Potawatomi Native American woman. So interesting how things changed in less than 100 years. The city reached global prominence with the Chicago World Fair in 1893, held from May to October, to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the New World in 1492. It served as a symbol of emerging American exceptionalism and imperialism, and the fair set a world record for outdoor event attendance, drawing almost 27 million people throughout its 6-month run. 46 nations participated in the fair, and Chicago was here to stay on the global stage. The World Wars brought remarkable changes to the city. Notably was the increased African-American population of Chicago, which increased almost 4 times, which led to the Chicago Black Renaissance, and the Prohibition era. I'm sure you've heard of Al Capone. Well, this is where he was gunning down people. And shortly after, during the Great Depression, the city really suffered because it was heavily reliant on industry. It was devastated, actually, and a lot of these industrial jobs were lost. Unemployment rates among Blacks and Mexicans in the city were over 40%. The Republican political machine in Chicago was utterly destroyed by this crisis, and every mayor since 1931 has been a Democrat. During World War II, the city produced more steel than the United Kingdom and Nazi Germany, and if you've heard of the name Enrico Fermi, he was a physicist at the world-renowned University of Chicago, and on December 2nd, 1942, he conducted the world's first controlled nuclear reaction at the university as part of the top-secret Manhattan Project. This obviously led to the creation of the atomic bomb by the United States. Revisiting the history of the city has made me appreciate its diversity, its character, its resilience, and its innovation potential. The city is located in northeast Illinois on the southwestern shores of freshwater Lake Michigan. Serving as a continental divide, as mentioned before at the Chicago Portage, connecting the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes watersheds. The Chicago River flows throughout much of downtown. Lakeshore Drive, if you get a chance, you should totally bike down it, runs adjacent to much of Chicago's waterfront. It's about 26 miles of waterfront and 24 public beaches here. The city is divided into pretty distinct, almost segregated neighborhoods, I would say. And Chicagoans tend to identify strongly with their community and area. So we'll start off with downtown, which is the center of the city for work and play, with shopping, skyscrapers, big theaters. And these are areas including the Loop, near North and near South. And this is right by the Chicago River and the Lake Michigan beachfront. Then there's the north side, which is Lakeview, Boys Town, Lincoln Park, and Old Town. These are upscale neighborhoods with tons of entertainment and very LGBTQ friendly. Then there's the south side, so this includes Hyde Park, Bronzeville, Bridgeport, Chinatown. This place is home to the University of Chicago and the White Sox. Then there's the west side, which includes Wicker Park, Logan Square, near West Side, and Pilsen. Again, you'll see a lot of ethnic enclaves here, dive bars, and I guess this is the hipster area. There's the far north, which is Uptown, North Lincoln, Rogers Park. It's pretty hip up here. It's very vibrant, and some of the neighborhoods are described as some of the most livable areas in the entire United States. Then you go a little bit more west, so far west. This includes Little Village, Garfield Park, Humboldt Park, and Austin. It's not really a tourist track. It's a little bit far away. And there's southwest, so it's the back of the yards, Marquette Park, Midway. There's huge Polish and Mexican neighborhoods and Midway Airport. There's far northwest, which is Avondale, Irving Park, Portage Park, and Jefferson Park. These are some of the most historic undiscovered gems in the neighborhoods near O'Hare International Airport. There's the far southeast, which is the historic Pullman District, East Side, South Chicago, and then far southwest. This is essentially Ireland and Chicago, full of authentic Irish pubs. Mentioning that real quick, the city of Chicago takes St. Patrick's Day extremely seriously, and if you do get a chance to visit here in March, go check out the river because it's dyed green on this really rambunctious holiday. This altogether represents about 77 distinct community areas and about 200 neighborhoods. And as mentioned before, Chicagoans really identify with their neighborhood. This is reflected in the flag of Chicago, which consists of 2 light blue horizontal bars on a field of white with 4 red stars. The 3 white areas of the flag represent from top to bottom the north, west, and south sides of the city. The top blue bar represents Lake Michigan, and the bottom blue bar represents the Great Canal. The stars initially stood for the flags that flew over the area, which was France first, Great Britain, Virginia, the Northwest Territory, the Indiana Territory, and Illinois, which started as a territory and became a state. And also, the points on the 6-point stars represent the virtues of religion, education, aesthetics, justice, beneficence, and civic pride. Depending on who's referring to the city, it can have multiple names. So anything from the controversial Chirac, which referred to an Iraq war statistic, which was from 2003 to 2012, around 4,265 people were killed in Chicago, which is nearly equal to the number of U.S. soldiers killed in Iraq in the same period. Siberia, because it's cold. The city of big shoulders, which I like that name, since the city had a heavy focus on major industrial activities such as meatpacking and railroad. You needed to be stormy, husky, and brawling. Chi-Town, as I said earlier, and the Windy City, which, again, it could be due to the cold, the wind tunnel effect, or the nature of politics. One of the most interesting nicknames of the city is the Second City, which was an insult from a series of articles written in The New Yorker, which contrasted Chicago with New York City, complaining about the city's economic decline, rampant organized crime, political corruption, and outdated schools of thoughts. The city has owned that name, especially after the Great Fire of 1871. In terms of rebuilding the city, this is the Second City, a great city. It is very walkable for a city its size. Western Avenue, Michigan Avenue, State Street, 95th Street, Cicero are all streets that are some of the longest continuous urban streets in the world. The City Beautiful movement in American architecture helped inspire a lot of Chicago's boulevards and parkways, and today the skyline of Chicago is obviously very recognizable, but among the world's tallest and most densest, including the Willis Tower, which was formerly known as the Sears Tower, which at the time was the tallest tower in the world. One other building that I have to mention is the Merchandise Mart, which was once one of the largest buildings in the world. It's currently 44th, I believe. It was so massive that it had its own zip code until 2008. It hosts numerous businesses, and it's notable because it also hosts the 1871 Startup Incubator, out of which I've worked several times. Frank Lloyd Wright, famous architect who was involved in my home city as well, he lived in Oak Park, which is a suburb of Chicago, and a popular tourist activity right now is to take the architecture boat tour along the Chicago River. This architecture is reflected in a lot of the financial buildings of Chicago, such as the Federal Reserve Bank and the Chicago Board of Trade. Speaking of the economy, the city is rated as having the most balanced economy in the United States because no single industry takes more than 13 to 14% of the actual GDP. It is the third largest gross metropolitan product in the United States, and I believe the fourth largest in the world. So in order, that would be New York, Tokyo, LA, and then Chicago. It's a major world financial center. It has the second largest central business district, CBD, in the United States, following Midtown Manhattan, and is the home of several major financial and future exchanges, including the Chicago Stock Exchange. Academically, it's the home of the Chicago School of Economics, one of the top schools of its kind in the world, which has, I think, 12 Nobel Prize winners. Companies like Kraft Heinz, McDonald's, and Motorola Solutions are all HQ'd in the Chicagoland area. And it contains the third largest labor pool in the United States with about 4.63 million workers. So new grads, people looking for jobs, pay attention. It's ranked usually 1 or 2 in terms of cities for corporate relocation. It's the second largest manufacturing hub in the nation, the second top destination for recent grads, the second largest number of Fortune 500s in the United States. I guess it does deserve the title of Second City. It has the third largest concentration of computer science degrees nationally, the busiest rail center, about 25% of all U.S. freight passes through the city, and notable inventions such as jazz, film, in-car radios, and mobile phones all have their origins in this city. When it comes to founding a company, no city offers higher proximity to a diverse customer base like Chicago. It has the largest convention center in the nation, which is the third largest in the world, McCormick Place, and ranks third in the US behind Vegas and Orlando in terms of annual conventions. And look, you don't need to work in software. The minimum wage for non-tipped employees is one of the highest in the nation at around $15. So there is tons of opportunity here, coupled with fantastic institutions like the University of Illinois, Northwestern University, and the University of Chicago. There's a ton of places to learn and really connect with intelligent people. And the city offers a lot at a fairly decent price point. I wouldn't consider Chicago as expensive as some of the larger cities of comparable renown in the world. And the city offers quite a bit in terms of nightlife and culture. The food here really reflects the city's ethnic and working class roots. The most nationally renowned is probably deep dish pizza. I must confess, I like thin style, New York style better. However, you have to try the Chicago style hot dog. It's traditionally steamed or boiled, naturally casing all beef wiener on a poppy seed bun, topped with yellow mustard, chopped onion, sliced tomato, and relish. Never ketchup, a little bit of salt. Famous places to get that would be probably Portillo's. Really nice, but Italian beef is sold all across the streets. Particularly delicious is the combo, which is a beef sandwich with the addition of a grilled Italian sausage. Oof, man, that sounds good. Sweet peppers and spicy giardiniera. Chicago is actually rated one of the top foodie destinations in the world. This is highlighted by its various ethnic neighborhoods, such as Chinatown on the south side, the Swedish Nordic area of Andersonville, Greektown on Halsted Street, Little Italy on Taylor Street, the South Asian diaspora on Devon Avenue, the Mexican neighborhoods of Pilsen and Little Village, the Middle Eastern dishes on Lawrence Avenue, the Polish cuisine on Milwaukee Avenue, and the large concentration of Vietnamese restaurants in the Argyle Street district in Uptown. If you're here in early July in Grant Park, you can kind of sample all this wonderful food at the world-renowned annual food festival, The Taste of Chicago. If you stay for another month, you'll get to see Lollapalooza, which is one of the largest dance and music festivals in the world. The music of the city is heavily influenced by African-American culture, so there's been great creations in rock and roll, house, jazz, and blues, often just denominated by Chicago. So Chicago blues, Chicago-style jazz, and of course, Chicago-style hip-hop, with notable names that you probably know, like Kanye West, Chance the Rapper, and Lupe Fiasco. Chicago is the birthplace of modern improv comedy, and you can experience this at the group Second City. Don't fail to check out the Joffrey Ballet, the Lyric Opera of Chicago, and the Goodman Theater. Just to add on to these public places that you should visit, there's the amazing Museum of Science and Industry, the Field Museum of Natural History, which houses, I think, the most complete Tyrannosaurus Rex statue in the world, which is Sue, the Adler Planetarium, the Shedd Aquarium, the Free Lincoln Park Zoo, and Millennium Park and Navy Pier. The neat thing for all of these is, especially if you are a Chicago/Illinois resident, they have free days throughout the year, so please go ahead and check them out. In August, one weekend, the city hosts the Chicago Air and Water Show, which is a free exhibition on the shores of Lake Michigan. I have to shout out our teams. Of course, it's a baseball city, so the White Sox and the Cubs. I remember the Cubs winning the World Series in 2016. They play at Wrigley Field in the north side neighborhood of Lakeview. The area is known as Wrigleyville. After that, the streets were flooded. There was a drought. They had last won the World Series in 1908. So Chicago went nuts. Obviously, we have the Chicago Bears of the NFL. They've won 8 NFL championships and 1 Super Bowl. And then the Chicago Bulls. We all know that this was the team that made the NBA famous across the world. Thank you, Michael Jordan. And if you're into hockey, the Chicago Blackhawks have won 6 Stanley Cups, most recently in 2015. Look, I get it. It's freezing in the winter, but Summertime Shy is one of the best cities in the world. In fact, I think annually it attracts close to 50 million domestic leisure travelers, about 11 million domestic business travelers, and about a million overseas visitors. It's diverse. It's built by immigrants. There's something in it here for everyone. It's also super easy to get around. Being a major transportation hub, it's actually a fairly important component in global distribution. So there are the expressways, but you can access most of the city through the Chicago Transit Authority, which handles public transportation through the L, or the Metra, which is the nation's second most used passenger regional rail network. In addition, taking rideshare services such as Lyft and Uber are relatively inexpensive compared to other large cities. And you can also ride your bike everywhere. Divvy, the bicycle sharing system, which has, I think, 5,000, 6,000 bikes all across the city at around 600 stations. And you can easily explore most of the city. In fact, I would probably recommend doing that over taking car. And getting here, pretty easy. It's served by O'Hare International Airport, which is the world's busiest airport measured by airline operators. I'm not going to lie. My heart is in the West. That's where I'm from, and I love the outdoors. But in terms of opportunity and just plain city, Chicago is hard to beat, and it's very, very welcoming. For a young person that's just starting out in their career, there's tons of ways to get involved, meet diverse groups of people, and importantly in our work, start companies. Yes, there are taxes, windy politics, and frigid weather. However, in many ways, I can't think of a better city in America to start a company.